Hey everybody, I'm just going to go through a really quick tutorial on how to sort of organize your layers over in this layer panel. It's a very essential tool that I highly recommend you kind of start doing early on because it's going to make your workflow a lot easier. What we're going to go through in this tutorial is a few essential commands while pretty much learning how this layer panel helps you organize your project. So I'll leave this over here just so you can kind of get used to those commands. So the first thing I'm going to walk through is all of these different layers. This is just sort of the default when you turn on Rhino. But layers are going to help you sort of situate your project and situate different components and information in your project. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you're putting things on different layers that are kind of in different sort of categories. So I'm just going to draw a box really quickly, and you'll notice this box is red, and that corresponds to the layer I'm working with. This little check mark is going to make it, I'm going to put it in shade real quick, this little check mark is going to make you work in the layer that you are, is going to make your objects show up in that layer that you're working on. So right now, I'll have a purple cylinder here. If you want to, one thing I do recommend is naming your layers, because by the end of some of these projects you're going to have like 80 layers, and you'll have no idea what they are other than the colors, and the colors will start to get kind of confused. So I didn't spell that right. I promise I know how to spell cylinder. So one thing you can do too is change the colors and how they kind of appear in the ghosted and shaded viewports. Just kind of makes it a little easier to work with a ton of different layers and makes it a little more appealing as well. So next thing I want to show you is this little icon on here. These are the hide and lock icons. So if you're checkmarked, you're never going to be able to lock or hide it because that's the layer you'll be working in. But let's say I wanted to get rid of this box right here. This counts as the hide icon. So it'll kind of get rid of that information. One thing to note though is if something is hidden, it won't move with other things. So if I was to try to select kind of where that box was and move, it's still going to be in that same spot. So kind of keep that in mind when you're moving stuff around. Make sure nothing's hidden if you need it all to move around or change. The next thing is the lock icon. So that makes it so pretty much no matter what you do, you cannot manipulate that object. But one thing important to note is that if something is locked, you can still snap to it if you have OSnap checked. It just won't change that object at all. So that is LockHide, and then the colors. Over here you'll see the material type, and we'll get into a different tutorial on that later. You probably won't be using that very much right now. And then the line type over here is what you want it to look like if you do like a make 2D. And over on this side is the print width. So if you wanted to print straight out of Rhino or work in Illustrator and kind of organize your layers that way. This is really handy to have these sort of layers when you do start to create your drawings, is when you make something 2D. Doing a totally different tutorial on this later. When you make something 2D, it actually prints it in those layers, so it makes it a lot easier for your sort of file management later on in Illustrator, Photoshop, or whatever you're working on. Okay, so next thing I'm just going to kind of touch on this menu. So if you right click over here on the layers tab, it's going to have a ton of different options for you to work with. So probably the one I use the most is change object layer. So let's say I wanted this cube to be in layer 3. You right click and go down to change object layer, and that's what does that. I just hit Control Z to undo that, but that just makes that a little easier. Another little tip and trick, I guess, to Rhino I want to show you is always pay attention up here into the command bar, because whenever you type a command, it's going to often give you a ton of options, and start to figure out what those mean. So for instance, it took me a while to learn this, but let's say I'm dragging this and I just wanted to make a copy of it so I could change it to another layer. If you look up in the command bar, it says tap Alt to duplicate. So if I hold Alt, you'll see that little plus symbol there above the arrow. And if it's up, that means I'll make an alternate. And right now I'm going to make an alternate because I want to create a sublayer to the cylinder. I'll call it less perp to make like a slightly less purple thing. These sublayers are really helpful to work within parent layers. But if I make a less purple one and then change object layer, I'll have like a slightly less purple thing. So super helpful there to use that. Few commands I really want to touch on. These are kind of essential for understanding your viewports are going to be things like hide. So let's say I didn't want this cylinder anymore. If you type in hide, that's going to go away. Let's say I wanted everything but this cylinder. I would type in invert, and it's going to select everything, and then I could do something like hide, get rid of those. Good way to sort of quick select things. You can also quick select things through the layer thing as well, through the layer management tabs as well. And then there's also, these are all ultra redundant, but something like isolate, and it'll make just that. Another tip too, this took me a while to figure out, strangely, but if you want to select multiple things at once just in a single viewport, if you click on a thing, click on an object, hold shift, you can select as many objects as you want to. Pretty much the same as doing that, but let's say I was trying to select this and not this. If you hold control, those objects will remain selected, but control will deselect an object. Super handy little trick there. Another thing I want to show you, I'm just going to isolate this really quickly, is actually I'm going to lock these over here so you can still see them wherever I put them. So those will stay the same. So isolate this, and I want to show you scale real fast. So these are how to scale your different objects. There's 3 different types of scale. Scale 1D. I just right-clicked there to select scale 1D in the object. Right-click will pretty much would say like OK. It's like saying OK or hitting enter. Scale 1D is going to scale an object in a single dimension. So you notice how I clicked from the right to the left, and I can scale it in that dimension and direction, really. If I type in scale 2D right here, that'll scale it in 2 dimensions. So on the X and Y axis there, and if I was working in the front viewport, I can scale it on the Z and X axis, but not the Y axis. Next thing is just scale in general. And I usually like to scale within the object itself, but you can kind of click anywhere in the modeling space and it'll do that. Scale is going to uniformly scale this object. And if I wanted to scale it, let's say I had another object out here, I can scale it 2 different objects that way. And then if you ever find yourself in a compromising position where you like can't find your model or anything, let's say I'm way out here, if you just clicked in another thing, I mean, one, you can just follow the gumball if you have that on, or you can go up to this little icon, zoom select, or redundantly type in ZS, which stands for zoom select, and it's going to bring you to that as long as you're working within that panel. What's kind of nice about zoom select too is it's going to orient the camera directly on the center of that object, so it makes it really easy to work within specific objects as well. If you type show, everything's going to come back up that you had hidden previously, and that means everything. So one thing to keep something from popping back up is to actually hide it with the light icon there. Let's see. Copy, I kind of showed you in another command, but I'll just go through it real quick. I'm just going to snap to that, make a million copies of that to make this really beautiful model, and just undo that. Copy is really helpful. Ortho, this is something that I find very useful. So in order to enable orthographic movement in a modeling space, if you hold shift, like I'm doing right now, it'll only move orthographically. Perhaps better demonstrated in the top view. But if I'm not holding shift, I can sort of spin it all on different axes in different places. This is also helpful with polylines too. So right now I don't have ortho, but right now I do have ortho. Makes it a lot rigid and easier to continue sort of orthographic lines. and models. And then the last thing that we're going to look at is move. So shortcut to doing move is just typing M. And you can kind of select anywhere on an object, doesn't matter where, and you can move it to another point or surface or part of a polyline to have it end in specific spaces. So that is managing layers and a few essential commands with how to view the things you're working in. I hope this helps.